Hi, this is Dr. Emma Offord, host of This Voice is Mine, the Unquiet podcast. For every neurodivergent mind that was masked, misread, or missed, where identity is reclaimed and the system gets named, This Voice is Mine is a podcast for those who were told they were too much, too sensitive, too chaotic, too intense, or not enough. Hosted by myself, Dr. Emma Offord, a clinical psychologist, neurodivergent woman, and unapologetic system disruptor. This podcast explores what happens when difference is pathologized and what becomes possible when we drop the shame, the script, and the medical model. Through stories, reflections, and conversations with people who were never meant to fit, This Voice is Mine reclaims the truth of neurodivergent minds, bodies, and ways of being. This is not about fixing or fitting in. It's about remembering who we are and unlearning everything they got wrong. Today I'm joined by Dr. Caroline Boyd, clinical psychologist, author, mother, and one of the clearest voices we have on the messy, truthful realities of becoming a parent. Caroline specialises in supporting parents through the transition from pregnancy into life with a baby and beyond, holding space for all the identities, emotions, and contradictions that come with that. In this conversation, we talk about intrusive thoughts, maternal anger, and the shadow side of motherhood, not as signs that you're failing, but as deeply human responses to an unequal system. Caroline invites us to see anger as a wise messenger and protector, and to bring compassion to the parts of us that are overwhelmed, exhausted, and saying something needs to change. I think you'll come away from this episode feeling less alone, more understood, and with a gentler, more empowered way of listening to your own anger and needs. Caroline, I'm really glad you're here. Thank you so much for joining the podcast and supporting our first season. It's really, really good to see you here.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's really lovely to be here and to meet you finally. Not quite in the flesh, but
And I'm glad we managed to make it happen because to the audience, we've just had about 20 minutes of technical issues, but we got there in the end. Um, so Caroline, just to begin, and for those maybe who are listening who aren't completely familiar with your work, would you mind telling us a little bit about who you are, the kind of work that you do, and the human that you are showing up today?
yeah, sure. So I have an independent psychology practice. I'm a clinical psychologist and author, and I support, I'd say, predominantly mums, but all parents around the transition to becoming a parent and beyond. So I do my one-to-one work with clients, and then I also, I guess, I have a passion for community psychology. So for me, that's what led me to set up my Instagram page, where my original intention for setting it up was to share my published findings around intrusive thoughts of harm about our babies. Um, and more broadly, just speaking the truths about motherhood that are rarely or not openly talked about because the shame and the stigma.
Mhm.
So I do have conversations with my community on Instagram, and then I write in the media about the nature of motherhood and our experience of matrescence.
Yeah.
This idea that, this about the real process of becoming a mother.
Yeah. And your Instagram is so incredible. Like when I see your posts, it just goes straight to the truth and straight to such unspoken experiences. And it, you know, it, it really is a powerful uh place to go and visit and to feel validated and to see such a large community of people contributing and also validating each other and expressing their voice, which I think is such a lovely thing to witness, where you start this catalyst of conversation around the unspoken experiences of parenting and motherhood. Yeah, I recommend everybody to go and look at Caroline's site. Um, So it's clear that you have spent a lot of time studying and researching and working with people. You're a mother yourself, so you have hands-on experience of parenting. What drew you so deeply into maternal anger? Because that's something that you also talk about. Not in a dominant way. There's many things that you talk about, but certainly that's something that I see as a theme in the work that you do.
Yeah, I think I mean, going back to what I was just picking up on, my published research around, well, that was exploring mothers' experiences of intrusive thoughts of harm about their babies. And so that was, I guess, inspired by my own experience of becoming a parent and experiencing those unwanted intrusive thoughts myself, after having my daughter. And I felt like at that time the research was so small, which I think says a lot about the reluctance to really explore
Mhm.
the darker side, what I call the shadow side of motherhood. Um, and then just understanding how common these thoughts are. I mean, they're pretty much universal. Nearly
Mhm.
every single um, mum and dads get them, but to a slightly lesser degree, will experience an unwanted intrusive thought or an image or an urge of harm coming to their baby. So that took me into doing lots of research and lots of reading of the literature. And so I guess for that, I read a lot of feminist critical psychology stuff. Um, about mothers' lived experiences and really kind of a lot about um, how mums' experiences are so shaped by the patriarchy and sort of understanding motherhood as institution, uh,
Mhm.
by which I mean the kind of a system with a set of beliefs, rules, and regulations that's defined and controlled by men. Um, which really dictates what it means to be a good, quote unquote, mother, and how constraining this can be for us as mothers in our lived reality.
Yeah.
Uh, and I mean, I can say about a bit more about that as we get stuck in, but it made me feel really angry. And
Mm.
at that point, I was heavily pregnant with my second baby, and after I had him, I guess I experienced, as many of us do as women, kind of flying headfirst into the wall of the patriarchy and just feeling that the inequality and, you know, experiencing some of that myself.
Mhm.
Uh, and but also being very aware of the landscape of modern parenting from the reading that I'd done. So I do bring in that sort of feminist lens to my work because it's incredibly it is angry making, but it's also empowering, I think,
Yeah.
for mothers to understand. Um, I guess this dominant system that really shapes our experiences of being a mum, and understanding that and bringing awareness to that, how we can work in that system, but also actually learn to challenge and to not conform to those all those rules and regulations and the shoulds, the oughts and the musts. And there is a lot of power in that actually. So yes, in a roundabout answer to your question, I think that's what brought me to speaking more about anger on my Instagram page at a time. I mean, this is like 5 years ago when there was more being talked about maternal anxiety, but hardly anything was being written about maternal anger, and it did feel quite risky even to talk about it.
Mhm.
Um, and now there's been some more research done by Nicole Fairbrother's brilliant team in Canada, which shows that yes, intrusive thoughts of harm about our babies do come with feelings of anger and irritation. So I was interested in that and seeing it in my clinical work with mums, supporting mums around their experiences of intrusive thoughts. Um, and so that's all those things combined, my clinical work, my research, my own experience all came together, which led me to specializing in maternal anger as well as anxiety.
I relate to all of that so deeply. And, this is what I'm saying when I go onto your Instagram page and you've posted something, and I'm just like, oh, thank you for saying that. Um, because I experienced intrusive thoughts when I had both my children of harm happening to them, that it would be my fault, that I would do something wrong to cause harm to happen to them. And it made me very hypervigilant. And um, there wasn't a lot of breathing space. My children were quite close together, they were 12 months apart. And so I didn't sort of get to kind of grow one child up before and have a bit of a break before the next one. We were all doing it in the mix. And so I was in that fight flight all the time for years and years. And these intrusive thoughts would show up, and feelings of inadequacy, of tiredness and rage and anger, just a whole melting pot of experiences that wasn't this kind of NCT blissful experience of motherhood that I was promised. It was just completely the opposite. And I really felt I didn't have anybody I could share that with, because certainly the mums that I knew at the time, most of them seemed to be breezing through the experience. Maybe they were also hiding these experiences from me and from each other. That could be what was happening for them, but certainly things seemed to be different for many of them. And I was so grateful when I found a few mums at the time who I could say this out loud to, and they wouldn't look at me like I needed help, because help is in there's something wrong with me for having those kind of thoughts. I really needed to be able to say to somebody, are you also worried that you're going to cause harm to your baby? And or even other kinds of experiences, like not trusting that I'd sterilized the bottle properly and then having to do it again and almost getting a bit compulsive about things. So, lots of just extra complicated mental health, noise that it was really hard to share. So, you raising voice, I can imagine you were reaching people like me and yourself. Um, and I just think that it's such a relief for a lot of people.
Mm. Yeah, it's really powerful, isn't it? It's even just reflecting back on your own experience quite a few years later, and just understanding how intense it can feel and how little space you have to actually process what's going on. And we know that, in our matrescence, in becoming a mother, we experience huge changes, not only to our body, but also our identity, our brains, and the relationships around us. It's just a time of so much change, all happening at the same time as trying to grapple with our new role and get to know this tiny, vulnerable new person.
Yeah.
So I know we're not kind of focusing on unwanted intrusive thoughts of harm about our babies today, but what I would say is that I have a section on my website which kind of breaks down just accessible summaries of what these are examples of things and how to cope with them. And for anyone listening who's really feeling like they're struggling, kind of signposting for support. Um, and for anyone who feels like, they're getting in the way of everyday life and affecting their ability to enjoy everyday life with their baby, um, then we can also include some signposting there. But yeah, they can be really paralyzing and just uncomfortable. And I think the emotional response is key. So when we have these kind of thoughts, um, for me, initially, after my first baby, it was having really vivid visions of dropping her down the stairs. And it'd be after I would have been, trying to settle her. And so I'd be really tired. So that was also a context. My capacity was definitely reduced. And I'd have these really horrible, unpleasant, vivid visions of dropping her.
Mhm.
And yeah, it felt really jarring, and like you say, it felt very much like, this isn't what the kind of thoughts I'm supposed to be having. This doesn't fit with what I expected motherhood to be like, because um, all of those stories and ideas and myths that we internalize around what I call, linked to the supermom myth, that
Yeah.
will be, calm, coping, in control, blissfully in love, and
Mhm.
enjoying every single moment, which we all internalize. None of us are immune to that,
Mhm.
and so it'd be very jarring. And so my emotional response, and it sounds like yours too, might be, horror, fear, um, shame for even having those thoughts, and that's just kind of is really key. And I guess what we know is that the more horrified we feel around these kinds of thoughts, the less likely they are to mean that we actually pose a risk to our baby. Uh, and obviously, context is important. So, if anyone's listening who does have an overwhelming urge to hurt themselves or their baby and is making plans to do so, then I'd really encourage that person to seek help immediately by calling 999 or visiting your local A&E.
Yeah.
Um, but the kinds of thoughts that we're talking about, in terms of intrusive thoughts, are largely anxiety driven.
Yes.
Um, and the research shows, really does show that they do not mean that, um, they did not mean you're more likely to hurt your baby if you
Exactly.
experience these thoughts. And actually, like, the greater risk is anxiety, maternal anxiety,
Yeah.
and sort of maternal OCD,
Yeah.
which can, you know, someone might develop that if
Mhm.
these thoughts become more intense and frequent and therefore harder to dismiss.
And this is what I think is so important about sharing these experiences and talking about the prevalence of this, because then, people will start to understand that this is part, for some people, part of the transition into becoming a parent, that those intrusive thoughts are not reflective of anyone's intention or parenting ability, that this is a product of this transition and tiredness and hormonal changes and all kinds of different things, that people don't have to suffer and they don't have to stay silent either, because of the content of those thoughts and the feelings that people have, they're very hard to share sometimes. And so that remains silent. And like you say, in that silence and in that developing anxiety, there could be an escalation and a maintenance of all of that. So I think that, along with the other topics that you're talking about, such as anger, which are emotions and experiences that many people judge and don't talk about and have got a bad reputation or have had a bad reputation. It is so important to talk about their different dimensions and give that air, so that people, you know, aren't caught in a myth about what's good and what's bad and what's right and what's wrong, that this is normal human experience and it
Mm.
is okay to have this and to talk about it. So if we were to sort of focus a little bit more on maternal anger, maternal rage, um, what let's start with sort of thinking about the voice of anger, perhaps. And I know you won't be able to completely answer this, but for many mums, what are some of the themes of anger? The voice of anger. What is it trying to say? What have mums told you? What have you witnessed?
Yeah. Well, I think to pick up on what you were saying just then, it's really interesting because I think with intrusive thoughts and also with experiences of anger,
Mhm.
it's the meaning that we attach to these experiences that gives them power. And just as with intrusive thoughts, if we interpret having those thoughts to mean that we're mad, bad,
Mhm.
crazy, there's something
Mhm.
wrong with us, then we're more likely to experience them more loudly and for them to possibly become problematic. And similarly with anger, we we all sort of are taught our own emotional rule books, if you like, growing up around
Mhm.
certain emotions, which are acceptable, which aren't. And for many of us, particularly as little girls just growing up, we're taught that anger is unacceptable for us. That we're taught to be good, to stay silent, to not make a fuss, to be polite, all of those good girl narratives, which mean that anger then becomes associated with a lot of fear.
Mm.
So I guess we can just to make those parallels. Um, and yeah, in terms of let's just think about what anger is. It can be a response, sorry, to a direct physical threat. But it can also be a really understandable, valid response to feeling powerless, to feeling violated, that a boundary has been crossed, to feeling unsupported, to feeling overloaded and overwhelmed, and feeling like our needs aren't being met. So it's it's really think of anger as such a wise emotion because you're right, it gets such a bad reputation.
Mhm. Yeah.
But it's both a messenger and a protector. So I see in terms of anger kind of as a messenger, it's telling us there's a problem. It's alerting us to harm, injury, injustice, and
Mhm.
insult. And it's also telling us something needs to change.
Yeah.
So, and then the process of, we know that anger, it triggers our internal alarm system, and it's that kind of mobilizing fight part of fight, flight, freeze, which gets our body going, our stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol, preparing us to act right now.
Yeah.
So it's a really adaptive emotion with an important function. It's telling us something needs to change.
Mhm.
And the way I have come to see it is that it's neither good nor bad. So trying to detach some of those powerful stories that we internalize about anger from the culture around us, from the family that we grew up in. And it's actually a protective signal that when a boundary is crossed or a need has gone unmet, it's a way of, when it shows up, it's a way of us voicing that distress.
Mhm.
So what I hear from mothers so much in terms of why they feel angry is just the sheer overwhelm in often bearing the bulk of the caregiving work, perhaps feeling unsupported or unseen by a partner, and feeling a sense of inequality in the home.
Yeah.
So there's many, many triggers to anger that come up in our mothering. And I guess the other thing that I hear a lot, and which I also understand, is that, women just often wish that they could take a magic pill, or there could be a quick fix that would just get rid of their anger, or would mean that they just don't have to feel this
Mhm.
really unpleasant, horrible anger at all. And I think it's through understanding the nature of anger and more around the neuroscience of anger,
Mm.
it kind of helps us understand that actually it's inevitable
Mhm.
comes up. in the day to day of modern mothering, with all of the pressures and those internalized expectations that we carry.
Yeah. Yeah. And what was coming to my mind when I was listening to you, I was thinking about the building of a kind of anger, the physical building of anger, like you said, the mobilizing physiological shift that happens, yet can't express it physiologically when you have perhaps a young baby by your side and you're trying to get that baby or help that baby to sleep, or you're feeding that baby, or, you know, there's the sort of inability to metabolize and to express the physical side of anger and frustration and everything that's building up. And I had a memory of, I don't know if you ever had one of these, but did you have one of those squishy chairs for a baby called a bumbo?
Oh, yeah, I remember.
I remember going to my friend. She said, "How are you?" I went, "I kicked the bumbo today." I just remember kicking it across the room, and I needed to physically get something out, because then I had to turn back towards my children and continue. But there was nowhere to displace or to put that anger. It wasn't going to go towards my children, but it had to go somewhere because it got to that boiling over point. So, I just think it's so important for people to hear that, you're not a bad person if you kick the bumbo, or, you have to go outside and scream for a minute in the closet or something, that actually that is probably a safe thing to do, is to do some kind of metabolization of what's building up inside of you. And I kind of wanted to ask you, what might happen to somebody if they can't express some of this anger?
Well, absolutely. I'm a big believer in releasing the anger safely.
Mhm, mhm,
You know, we need to get it out. I mean, unlike sadness, anger is a really physical, visceral emotion. It has a real energy to it.
mm,
And yeah, we've all felt that familiar kind of, for me, it feels like a kind of fireball in my stomach, and it's kind
mhm,
of, and then it erupts, moves through my body up and out, and it can feel really electric and powerful. I think it gives this illusion of invincibility in that moment, but it's when it's coming out because it hasn't been attended to, and
mhm,
maybe it's been left simmering under the surface, which we'll come to in a moment.
mhm,
That's when it often comes all flying out, and there's this
mhm,
sense of uncontrollability about it, and that can feel really scary actually to a lot of women. So I'm a big believer in learning to release that anger. We need to get it out. And, I remember mum has said to me in one of my workshops, that she threw the baby monitor
mhm,
explosion of anger, and then the baby monitor smashed into lots of little pieces. And so we need to find that release which is more affordable, where we don't then have to replace something that we use every day and costs money. So yeah, that is what often is really helpful, is to find that release in the form of movement, you
mhm,
moving our body, um,
mhm,
because our brain, when we flip into that, um, that into the fight part of fight, flight, freeze,
mhm,
um, we need to release that energy. So movement could be jumping jacks if you're with your kids. It could be running on the spot, but our brain is telling our body, "You're not safe. You need to prepare for action right now." And then if we have that burst of activity, it's a way, which is what is meant to happen when fight, flight, freeze is triggered. Then it's a way of telling our system, "It's okay. The danger's now over. You've survived. You're
mhm,
safe now," and the system can switch off. So I think the problem is that for so many of us as women, we weren't taught these skills. We
mhm,
haven't been taught. And actually, we've been taught almost the opposite, which is
Mhm.
we grow up believing and learning that actually anger is unsafe. For some people, it might be that love or approval depends on being good,
Mhm.
compliant, or quiet.
Yeah.
Some women, have been emotionally and or physically abused,
Mhm.
and some have witnessed anger in a really frightening, unpredictable way, perhaps in a parent, an explosive parent. So really learning that anger is scary and there's a lot of confusion and fear around it. I should also mention that for some people listening, that they might not be able to relate to, say, having an explosive parent, but they might have grown up in a household where anger was simply unacceptable. There was no space for it.
Mhm.
So it was kind of forbidden for everyone. So that when anger did show up for you when you were little,
Mm.
then it was you were punished for it.
Yeah.
And so with all of these experiences, there's a learning there. Well, there's kind of automatic internal process that happens where we just learn to cut off from that anger.
Mhm.
It's too scary, and there's too much fear around it, so we just learn to cut off from it. And that's where the part of us that learns to suppress our emotions, those big emotions like anger, develops. And so we learn to shove the anger down, to squash it down.
Mm.
And yeah, it's not good. It's not good physiologically, and it has real long-term, I guess, physical health problems in terms of
Mm.
women reporting increased anxiety, depression, chronic pain, immune system conditions. So yeah, I do think it is gendered in that we know that women report feeling more angry and with more intensity than men do.
Mm.
And I think partly that's because we've been socialized to ruminate, to keep it to ourselves and to mull it over rather than finding a way, an outlet for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is what I also see is suppressed emotions, suppressed anger. And when it's kind of chronic, when you're having that experience over and over again and the suppression continues for a very long time, then there are these consequences, and it can be physical, it can be psychological, relational. Um, and so it's not as though we can pretend it's not there. We can kind of externally almost pretend anger isn't there or isn't happening, but it finds somewhere to go. And
It leaks
so,
out, doesn't it? It leaks
yeah,
sideways as passive aggression, or we turn it inwards on ourselves.
yes, yeah.
Often anger can be, we know it masks more vulnerable emotions underneath, and there's grief there, perhaps for not being the endlessly patient mother that we imagined we'd be.
Yeah.
So there's a lot, there's a lot underneath that anger, but like you say, it finds its way out. For people who for whom it is resonating, where that anger just flies out,
Mhm.
erupts in a way that feels kind of out of control. Or some women will say, I feel like I go from naught to 100s in a
Mhm.
second. I think it's understanding, as we say, we know anger builds on anger.
Mhm.
And so, with mothering, there's just multiple provocations throughout any given day.
Yeah.
And so when you're shoving it down, suppressing it
Mhm.
in response to every provocation, then it's gonna stay simmering under the surface, and then when you get to, like, the 20th, the 100th irritation that day, which which is often something seemingly quite small, like losing your keys, when you're trying to leave the house, or you can't find the shoes for your toddler,
Mhm.
and then whoosh, it all explodes out of you. And that's where I think, like you say, there are those social costs. So there's not just a physical health cost, but yeah, anger, when it's um, vented in that kind of uncontrolled way, it does impact the relationships around us. And that's where, I guess thinking about just the neuroscience, we know that when we flip our lid, our amygdala, so our emotional brain, it kind of hijacks us, and our thinking brain, so the prefrontal cortex, this lovely bit behind our forehead, just goes offline.
Yeah.
And our emotional brain and our thinking brain are just disconnected. They're no longer talking to each other. And it's in that flipped lid mode where we're more likely to, you know, moral reasoning goes out the window. We can't think straight, and we're more likely to act in ways that are scary to those around us, including our kids.
Yeah.
So there are real costs to the anger when it's excessive and when it's not understood.
Mm-hmm.
Mm, but I think the the process of doing what I call the U-turn and starting to understand our anger is really about learning the real benefits of anger and how we can experience the real value of anger without experiencing so much of the cost.
Yeah. Yeah. What I'm thinking, hearing you talk there, Caroline, is there's lots of work to be done. There's work to be done in terms of ourselves and our relationship to anger and our relationship to ourself in anger. And that's part of the journey, isn't it? That's part of the change that you're talking about, and the voice that you're raising and the awareness that you're raising. And then I also think, and I'm sort of from my own experience and from other people I've talked to and clients I've worked with, where they come to some acceptance around anger and they see the importance and the wisdom of anger, and it it helps and empowers them to make some changes so that they're not feeling as disempowered. They are creating and designing life a little bit differently and saying no and putting boundaries in place so that they aren't feeling this kind of ongoing powerlessness. But there there also needs to be a society that supports that as well, because we can say, right, we appreciate anger and it's welcome and I'm putting this boundary up. But if
Mm.
everyone keeps wanting us to go back in the box and stay as we were and be the good mum who doesn't get angry, then that's a very difficult situation, isn't it? We need society to also come on board with this. So I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that, and also, why this is an important time to talk about these issues in our society.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think it's sort of twofold that there's the kind of internal work for us to do, and that healing to do, and where for many of us it might be really doing some kind of that deeper work to address perhaps childhood trauma, experiences of not feeling contained or understood or soothed in a good enough way,
Mm.
where there's that wounded child part of us that needs to be witnessed. And that's, what I would say is kind of one of the aims of the EMDR work that I do.
Mm.
It's just really helping someone process some of those really difficult earlier experiences. And then within that, kind of understanding why that angry part of themselves has got very kind of activated after having a baby. This part that kind of
Mhm.
voices the distress, but often the grief underneath of what they didn't get. But is the voice saying, "What about me? What about my needs? I've had enough," in terms of the other part that developed to perhaps prioritize other people, and in doing so neglect their own needs, and perhaps a part that's quite perfectionist and sort of has learned to overcompensate, needs to, be doing, because their sense of self-worth has got very much equated with external achievements and approval. So I think there's that kind of strand, which is difficult to sort of say and summarize, but Hopefully
You did
that,
a great job.
you know. But yeah, then there's also the agitating for change on a societal level, and really understanding, that we live in this system, this society that doesn't respect and value the caregiving work that mothers do, but everyone is capable of doing this mothering work. And this is something that needs to change, and I think the more that we can support mums to name these systems that don't that they're really failing to support mothers and families more broadly, structurally. So there's real systemic failures there, and I guess an example might be, for me, it kind of really stands out around women when they have a baby and around birth. And I know the NHS is a very constrained system and it's not getting the funding and the attention and the support that it needs to flourish. And sadly, what it means is that a lot of women have experiences where they don't receive the kindness that they so need. There's a hugely vulnerable time in their lives and they don't feel supported. They don't feel like they can share in the decision making. And so, that this is a time when a lot of trauma can be experienced. And I think that this is just one area where, for a mum who might come to see me for one-to-one work, can also, once she has an understanding of her anger and what might lie beneath it in terms of that vulnerability, she can also use her anger as a force for change. So really channeling it constructively in terms of perhaps joining up with charities that work to improve mothers' birth experiences and the experiences of all birthing people. And and I've had women who have gone on to do that and done real activist work in that area. So it's just, I guess it's one example of how anger it can be a vehicle for change. And when we channel it constructively, and there is real change to be made there. It's not only around birth, I'm thinking about more affordable childcare, uh, the gender pay gap, the motherhood penalty that both need addressing. There's so many structural issues that need to be really worked on and improved that would actually improve parents' experiences as a whole and
Mm.
help them feel more held, supported, but also valued. And that's the bit that's missing. And there's a lot of talk around it takes a village to raise a child. Actually, the reality for a lot of families today is that they're parenting in isolation, and we're designed to raise children in groups with the help of, allo parents, allo meaning other, and an extended family and kin, and that's not available to so many families. And so it becomes when, inevitably mothers do struggle for many different reasons, then it becomes seen both by us as mothers and societally as a personal failing. And it's not. It's systemic failing and something that we all need um to work to improve.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And it really feels in the conversations I have with mothers that that really is the missing piece, that when things go wrong or when anger erupts or something else, happens, that the responsibility lands on the mum and she's blamed or she blames herself. And it is a system failing and not supporting and scaffolding her through that transition and her experience of being a mum. Um, I love that. I absolutely love that. So I'm just um, also thinking about, um, we've been talking about when anger can spill out, and that perhaps there are some clues or some signs that anger is building, that maybe are not in someone's awareness, that it might be in the body before it's kind of completely in the mind. Are there ways that people might be able to sort of doing some of that work where they're becoming more embodied and listening to the voice of their body before it gets to that place where that can feel very destructive and very shameful? Um, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think teaching that bodily awareness, which again, this isn't our fault. Many of us have not been taught to
Mm. Mhm.
connect with our bodies. We've almost been taught to disconnect.
Mhm.
Um and so it's a learning, I think, for many women, but really tuning in to your body throughout a given day. So
Mhm.
I sometimes talk about kind of punctuation points or transition points. So points in the day, maybe after drop off, or possibly actually even before that, because the mornings can be so stressful when you're
Mhm.
trying to get little ones out of the house. So pausing to check in with yourself, I think during the morning drop off is also
Yeah.
really helpful. But it might be kind of later in the day when you're about to go and pick your child up from school and you're kind of coming out of work mode. So those kind of transition points, but just really checking in with your body and noticing what are the cues for you. So for some
Mm.
people, it might be a clenched jaw, which can often lead to headaches. Um, it might be clenched fists. It could be, yeah, it could be headaches. Um, so just kind of noticing, where do you feel it in your body when that anger is starting to build? And the more that we can notice, the more we can then start to catch the anger as it's rising before it gets to boiling point, and then
Mhm.
we go from 0 to 100, or what feels like 0 to 100. We can actually catch it a lot earlier. And I think as part of that check-in, I often talk about doing the U-turn.
Mm.
It might be for, I'm just trying to think, give more examples, but for some people, it might be they get more sweary, more snappy, so they kind of see it in their behavior. It might be that you find yourself ruminating and kind of getting locked in those spirals of resentment.
Mhm.
So just noticing, what are the signs for you that your cup might be about to overspill and anger is building in your body. And then doing the U-turn is a lot around just doing that check-in. What am I thinking and feeling? And focusing on anger is, what am I angry about and with whom?
Mhm. Mhm.
Such a simple question, but actually it's something that because we haven't been taught to meet our anger with compassion or to validate anger in ourselves, we don't even feel we have the right to ask ourselves that question and to legitimize our anger. So
Yeah.
what am I angry about and with whom? And just trying to get a bit clearer on that. But maybe that needs to come after a bit of self-regulation, because if we're feeling fired up, then we're not going to be able to think straight. We're in that fight, flight, freeze state where our emotional brain, our thinking brain is just disconnected. So pausing to check in and noticing what you're feeling in your body, and just naming your feelings. We know time and like research shows that time and time again, the power of just naming your feelings is a way of separating from them. So you're no longer so identified with that anger. As
Yeah.
you start to name, yeah, I'm feeling really pissed off, I'm really tired, and I'm feeling really stressed.
Yeah.
So naming that anger and allowing it to be there, just giving yourself permission, and like saying that to yourself, put your hand on your heart.
Mm.
It's really soothing for our nervous system, and just saying to yourself, I give myself permission to feel pissed off for the next 5, 10 minutes, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Um, and then trying to get in touch, if you can, with what other feelings are there and what are the needs underneath. Is it more rest that I need? Is it more support that I need? Do I need to talk to my partner? Uh, have I identified that actually doing the mornings with the kids on my own is like a real trigger point for me? How can we work together to get me more help in this? And for solo parents, how can I give myself permission to get the respite that I need and maybe ask a friend for help, and to understand that this doesn't mean that I'm not coping. This is actually something that is a very human need.
Yeah. Seems to me that giving voice to anger, giving permission for it to exist, is really at the heart of a lot of this. And
Mm.
maybe we don't have extra support. Maybe we don't have the finances to, you know, help us take a break. But if we can be kind to ourselves and validate that anger,
Yeah.
that goes some way towards, you know, being compassionate and acknowledging our needs, doesn't it?
It really does. It
Yeah.
really does.
Yeah. So, Caroline, we're sadly pretty much at the end of our conversation today. It's been so lovely to talk to you, and I really hope so many people hear this and hear your voice about all these issues. I think it's, it's such a safe conversation that you're creating. It brings so much safety to people when people are talking about anger, and being angry is a dangerous or you know, a, an unsafe thing. Actually, you're flipping that around and saying, no, it's quite the opposite. It's a very safe thing to do, is to acknowledge it and to talk about it. If you could leave our listeners with perhaps one sentence about the voice of anger, what might that be?
I feel like we haven't talked so much about repair, but I think actually a lot of the theme of our conversation has been around repairing our own relationship with anger and
Mm,
repairing the relationship with ourselves. And I think that is often actually missing in the conversation. There's a lot of focus on the child, which of course, is absolutely important, but we need to bring in the mother too. And so we need to think about the repair, not only with our child if needed, but also with ourselves. So I think the thing that I'd like people listening to just to hear most is that your anger doesn't mean that you're bad or you're crazy or that you're broken. It's actually a sign that something needs to change, and it's often a protective voice which is trying to stand up or tell you something,
mm,
to sort of pay attention to perhaps a kind, the younger wounded part of you, or some vulnerable feelings there that need some care and attention.
yeah, I love that. That's just beautiful. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you so much for your time. It's been really delightful to talk to you, and I'm so glad that you could be here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.